The year is 1941. America is at war. The skies over Europe are on fire. And the United States military has a problem, not just with the enemy abroad but with itself at home. Because somewhere in Washington, D.C., there are men in uniform who believe that black men don't have the intelligence, the courage, or the nerves to fly a fighter plane. They wrote it in reports. They said it in meetings. They put it in official military doctrine. They were wrong. And the men who would prove them wrong were training in a small, segregated Alabama town, a place that would become the birthplace of one of the greatest military units in American history. This is the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. If this story moves you, subscribe to Black MicroStories and hit the bell. A new story drops every single day. A nation that doubted them. To understand the Tuskegee Airmen, you first have to understand the world they were born into. In the early 20th century, Black Americans were not just excluded from opportunity, they were actively told they were incapable of it. Segregation wasn't just about water fountains and bus seats. It was a system designed to limit black ambition at every turn. In aviation? Aviation was seen as the ultimate symbol of intelligence, precision, and heroism. It was a white man's domain, and the military intended to keep it that way. In 1925, the U.S. Army commissioned a study, the Army War College Report. Its conclusion was chilling. Black soldiers were mentally inferior, physically cowardly, and unfit for combat leadership. This was not fringe thinking. This was official U.S. military policy. But there were black men who refused to accept that verdict. Men who had grown up watching biplanes cut across the sky and felt something stir in their chest. Men who wanted to fly not just for themselves, but to shatter every lie ever told about their people. They just needed someone to give them a chance. The experiment begins. The chance came reluctantly in 1941. Under pressure from civil rights leaders, black newspapers, and activists who refused to be silent, the U.S. War Department approved a program, the creation of an all-black military aviation unit. They called it an experiment. The message was clear: prove yourselves or justify every doubt ever held about you. The location chosen was Tuskegee, Alabama, deep in the Jim Crow South. The training base at Moton Field sat on land that had once been defined by slavery. Now it would be defined by something else entirely. The men who arrived were extraordinary. Many held college degrees at a time when most Americans didn't finish high school. Some had been teachers, doctors, lawyers. All of them burned with a desire so fierce it bordered on fury. They were told the training would be harder than anything they'd faced. They were told the washout rates were designed to stop them. They were told the odds were against them. They laced up their boots and walked onto that runway anyway. Learning to fly in a world that wanted them to fail, the training at Tuskegee was grueling by any standard. Flight cadets endured brutal physical conditioning, advanced academic coursework, and exhausting hours in the cockpit. They had to master meteorology, navigation, mechanics, and combat tactics. One mistake in the air could be fatal. And the instructors, some of whom didn't believe in the program, were watching for every stumble. But something remarkable happened on that dusty Alabama airfield. They didn't stumble. They soared. The first class of 5 pilots graduated in March 1942, earning their silver wings. Among them was Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of the first black general in the U.S. Army, and a man who had sat through 4 years of near-total silence at West Point, shunned by his white classmates. He didn't break. He flew. Davis would go on to command the 332nd Fighter Group, the legendary Red Tails, and he would lead them into history, into the fire. In April 1943, the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first Tuskegee unit to see combat, was deployed to North Africa. They arrived to skepticism, cold shoulders, and military commanders who openly questioned whether they belonged there. Then they started flying missions. Over North Africa, then Sicily, then Italy, the Tuskegee Airmen began racking up a combat record that was impossible to ignore. They flew escort missions, strafed enemy targets, and engaged German and Italian aircraft in brutal dogfights over the Mediterranean. But it was their escort work that would make them legendary. American bomber crews were suffering devastating losses to enemy fighters. Escort pilots often abandoned the bombers to chase down kills, leaving the slower aircraft dangerously exposed. The Red Tails didn't chase glory. They stayed with their bombers. Mission after mission. The 332nd Fighter Group, now flying with their distinctive red-painted tail fins, escorted, Allied bombers deep into enemy territory. And mission after mission, they brought those bombers home. Bomber crews began requesting the Red Tails by name. Because when the Red Tails were on your wing, you came home. The record and the resistance. By the end of World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen had flown over 1,500 missions and more than 15,000 individual sorties. They destroyed or damaged over 400 enemy aircraft. They sank a destroyer using only their guns, an extraordinary feat. They earned more than 150 Distinguished Flying Crosses. But even as they were fighting fascism abroad, they were fighting racism at home. In April 1945, just weeks before Germany surrendered, 101 black officers at Freeman Field in Indiana were arrested for trying to enter an officers' club they were legally entitled to use. The military had simply segregated it to keep them out. They refused to accept it. They were arrested. And their act of defiance became one of the first organized acts of civil rights resistance in modern American history. They were fighting on two fronts. And they were winning on both. Coming home. When the war ended, the Tuskegee Airmen came home as heroes. To a country that still refused to treat them as equals. They returned to Jim Crow laws. To segregated hospitals. To the back of the bus. Some were attacked in uniform. Some found themselves unable to vote in the states they had risked their lives to protect, but they didn't disappear. Their record was undeniable, and their voices grew louder. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. Historians trace a direct line from the Tuskegee Airmen's service and their resistance to that order. They didn't just fly planes, they flew a hole through American apartheid. The legacy. In 2007, the surviving Tuskegee Airmen were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor in the United States. They sat in the Capitol, men in their 80s and 90s, many in wheelchairs, wearing their red jackets. And the country that had once called them an experiment finally called them what they were, heroes. They were told black men couldn't fly. They answered at 30,000 feet. They answered with red tails cutting through the clouds above Europe. They answered with a combat record that still stands as one of the most decorated in American military history. And they answered for every black child who ever looked up at the sky and dreamed. Subscribe to Black MicroStories, a new Black history story every day. Like this video, share it, and come back tomorrow. Because these stories deserve to be told.